Good afternoon. I don't know what if it's an honor to be right after lunch or a curse, but here we are. My name's Albert Joerger. I'm the founder of the Conservation Foundation of the Gulf Coast, and also president of the Joerger Group. And as was said, I'm here to talk about economics and conservation. Probably in this room, as we look around, we would all agree that the environment is priceless. From natural lands to our backyard, some say you can't put a price on it. And memories with our friends and children, enjoying the outdoors, seeing pelicans grab a fish out of the bay or dolphins dashing through the surf. These are memories we'll hold forever and difficult to put a value on. But I think that it's really undeniable, the economic factor for open space. I hope we emerge after I speak that your big takeaway is that we can all want to conserve land because it's morally appropriate or because we want to see species persist or that we are environmental enthusiasts, but you should basically conserve land also because we can all make more money. From the health benefits, the savings in medical expenses, to connecting endangered species with one another, utilizing conserved land for environmental benefits are really the underpinning of Florida's economy today and in the future. So I thought first and foremost I would talk a little bit about, see if we can get that a little higher, talk about what's going on here in Florida. There's a proposed constitutional amendment to fund land conservation statewide. That initial work is polling very, very well. For its success, funds will need to be raised and signatures collected. The amendment will be titled the Land and Water Conservation, and it would dedicate funds to conserve and restore Florida's conservation and recreation lands. It will fund land acquisition trust fund and support acquisition, restoration, improvements in conservation lands, including wetlands, forests, and fish and wildlife. The amendment will be placed on the 2014. Has everyone heard about the amendment? So the 2014 ballot, there's about $500,000 that needs to be raised and 110,000 signatures. When considering functional ecosystems, there's really three different benefits. First, there's purely the environmental benefits, such as protecting species and creating habitat. Then there are environmental and economic benefits, like working landscapes and protecting water quality and the resulting savings that occur with clean water coming into drinking water facilities. And then lastly, there are purely the economic benefits, like tourism and infrastructure, revenue either saved or generated by activities associated with the environment. So in terms of the environmental benefits, I think in this crowd we're all pretty aware of it, creating functional ecosystems to enhance the persistence of rare, endangered, and keystone species. Functional ecosystems allow these charismatic species to persist so that you can have tourists that can come and see them, and that you have people who want to move here because they enjoy Florida's wildlife. Saving the environment for its esoteric reasons, and saving the environment is really saving the environment for environment's sake. Just like we might save a Picasso in a museum, we save habitats to allow us to protect the Florida black bear or the range of the Florida panther. We're protecting species so our children and grandchildren can enjoy the same environment that we all enjoyed. And I always say I never met anyone who said, "My God, I came to Florida when I saw the roads and schools. I moved here immediately." And so we really want to enhance her desirability, finish existing conservation areas, enhance greenways and corridors, and eliminate edge effect by getting rid of inholdings. Greenways and corridors. The constitutional amendment will allow for the purchase of inholdings in conserved natural areas. It will help reduce the edge effect on Florida's ecosystems, and reducing edge effect, of course, can reduce management costs and also enhance the habitat. The constitutional amendment will allow for the creation of corridors And this is important because, we can't buy everything. And so we have these, desperate conservation areas. And not only can we allow for biological material to move between them, but they can also enhance value. Corridors allow for they also allow for the translocation of species. I think it was mentioned earlier how when we think about sea level rise, we look at how can these species that are at where the land and water meets, and being able to have these corridors allow them to move as we see sea level rise. Far-ranging species, which are often charismatic, such as the Florida panther, utilize greenways and trails, and this can really boost tourism. And it's always funny because you think, what the heck? You can hardly see a panther, and what good is is a couple handfuls of panthers going to do for Florida's tourism? And then, as I was getting ready, I was in Yellowstone National Park with my daughters this summer, and we had seen them all. We saw black bears, grizzly bears. We saw coyotes, yellow-bellied marmots, which really captured their imagination. I have no idea why. And we got all the way through the list of things to see, and they realized they hadn't seen any wolves. And so there we were on the quest to see wolves. And we spent a whole day looking for wolves, buying sandwiches with our spotting scopes and buying snacks and waters. And then, the most charismatic megafauna on Earth, of course, are human beings. And so we ran into the wolf researchers, and they said, well, no, they're here, we're sure they're here. What you need to do is come first thing in the morning. So my kids decided at 4 o'clock in the morning that we would board our vehicle with our pajamas and winter coats on because it was 36 degrees. And we were visually hunting the wolves of Yellowstone. And so on, and it gets to be about 7 o'clock in the morning, and we hadn't seen any yet. And then finally we saw them. We saw the alpha female and the alpha male, and my kids knew their names and knew the history behind them. And there was this commingling between the megafauna of human beings and the researchers and the managers, and the excitement that they had created around these pretty, controversial creatures, and then the creatures themselves. And so we spent an extra day in Yellowstone Park so that we could see, and we could check wolves off of our list. And so I think we can't deny the power of these charismatic species and their economic benefits. In terms of conservation with both economic and environmental benefits, these are activities that allow wildlife to persist and that either work well as buffers or connectors between conservation areas. They also allow us to attract tourists and recreationalists, because let's face it, in many, many portions of Florida today, the species that are here that actually persist pretty well in a fragmented landscape. Once again, we need to look at the land and what happens when there's areas of land that can't be protected, that lie between areas of conserved lands. And working landscapes offer an opportunity to connect and buffer conservation lands. These working landscapes, such as timberlands, agricultural lands, ranch lands, they offer habitat, again, for these very charismatic, far-ranging species, and an opportunity for economic returns to be generated on those same lands. Maintaining land in an environmentally friendly business like farming or ranching or forestry retains it as an economic resource here in the community while allowing for functional ecosystems. And I think we all saw it in the last downturn that we experienced in Florida. Tourism is number one in Florida. And then you have services like legal services and healthcare. But ranching and agriculture and silviculture offer a great opportunity because they keep trucking along and offer a third leg of the economic stool in Florida. So in terms of agriculture, ranching, and forestry, they also reduce the cost of management because it gives us all partners that we can manage with. As I was looking around, I saw a quote from Martin Main, and he and his colleagues from the University of Florida said that Florida ranches are among some of the most complex managed ecosystems. Ranchers must manage every component of the system with an eye to both profitability and the environment. Well-managed ranches provide multiple benefits to Florida's citizens. They support the economy through their contributions to taxes and economic stimulation, and they protect our environment through preserving habitat, water supplies, and conserved green space. So these are really multi-use landscapes and a real home run in terms of their economic benefits. Greenways and corridors have economic benefits as well. The edge of corridors offer choice sites for building residential development, tourism infrastructure, recreational infrastructure, and commercial space. In Boulder, Colorado, corridors impact on residential property values by 32%. So that's a 32% increase in value of adjacent residential property values. Pretty darn substantial. The private sector not only enhances the appeal for Florida tourists in working landscapes, but can also enhance revenue through concessionaires, outfitters, hoteliers, restaurant business owners. The reach of Florida's environment goes beyond rare and endangered and keystone species, but is also really the underpinning of Florida's economy. It's why we're all here. It protects things like water supply, water quality, natural systems, which are dear to my heart, and attract not only tourists, but us as individuals. Resorts can bring individuals that can pay fees, tours, purchase souvenirs and meals, and therefore providing economic benefits and potential help with resource management. It was really interesting. I worked on a case study once, and it was in Africa, and you would think that why would anyone go to Africa? They'd go there to see animals. Well, it turns out that most people who go to Africa go for the beaches, and then they add 2 or 3 days to their trip to go and see wildlife. And I think that here in Florida, we can really make that link between, by promoting our natural areas in beach resorts and getting people to add. The easiest way to increase your tourism is to get someone who's already come here to add a day or add 2 days. And so that individual concessionaires and businesses can partner with the conservation community, the state, county, and local governments, and provide recreational infrastructure such as, we're all kind of strapped for cash in terms of creating infrastructure, but restrooms, docks, parking areas. And I really believe that the more people we have out using our natural lands, the more potential money there'll be for managing them and also for acquisition. And so we need to make wild lands part of the central core of what it means to be a Floridian. And I imagine that's the case for all of us here in this room, but we have to make it the case for people living in Miami and people living in downtown Sarasota. One example that I've always thought of with public-private partnership would be with the hunting community, and I know that they're not always everyone's favorite, but hunters buy licenses and guns and ammunition and supplies and sandwiches on their way in and a beer on the way out. And partnering with the hunting community really allows, it's an extra set of eyes to maybe keep poachers out, because people who have rightful access to hunting lands tend to be pretty passionate about them. And also is a great way to get rid of either to cull herds or to get rid of invasive species. So I think there's some real potential there, and building that bridge between the environmental community and the hunting community. I would argue it's the same community, but I think more and more bridges need to be made between those two. So in terms of functional ecosystems, and that's a really important thing, and I think as we all go to Tallahassee or we go to see our county commissioners or we talk to people in the community, functional ecosystems are not sort of a pie in the sky, kind of esoteric, warm and fuzzy thing. I mean, it is that, but it's really critical to generating revenue from these landscapes. No one's going to want to come and see dead coral reefs and empty forests. And so we really need to make sure that these keystone species and then all the species associated with them are there, because it's a really interesting story. I remember once we had some major donors and we were supposed to have a burn, and the burn didn't occur, as burns often don't. And so we had half a day to kill. And so we took about 45 minutes standing next to a hole in the ground. It was a gopher tortoise hole. Nothing came in, nothing went out, but the people were riveted on every potential thing that could have been down in that hole. And so I think that we really have to work at telling our story, because it's a really fascinating story and it's a really important story. I think that if we can get this story out, that we can see then enhanced construction of tourism and recreational amenities, and these will bring new jobs and new traffic to all the different businesses so that all of our boats will rise together. Conservation areas not only support businesses directly, such as outfitters, but they support residential and commercial and additional recreation development as well. Public and private partnerships, including concessionaires, can be used again as would they be a second set of eyes or would they be a fourth set of eyes? I'm not sure. But at any rate, the more people who are out in the landscape, I always had this thought. We created this preserve, and it was right adjacent to a mobile home park, and the thought was it was going to be a nightmare to manage. And so we said, you know what, there's a youth rowing program that's looking for a home. So we blew about 120 kids a day through that site. We had no problem with vagrancy or vandalism or anything else because the park was humming. And so I think the more people that we can get out and the more diverse user groups that we can get to use our preserves, the more animated they'll be and the easier they'll actually be to manage. So there's also, and it hasn't been used too extensively in Florida, but conservation communities. People buy into communities that have green infrastructure. So even as we see in places like Naples where people will buy a house on a golf course, there's people who will buy houses that have associated protected open space with them, and they'll actually pay for access to those open spaces. The price of houses can be increased because of a view of woods or wetlands or an open pond, and people are willing to pay for these views, and you see an increase in home values associated with proximity to these amenities in these communities. So tourism in Florida, I always think about our environmental resources. They're really the underpinning of the tourism economy. Whether someone's, even if someone says, I'm just going to that tower and going to the beach, they need to have clean water out off the beach, and having functional ecosystems is pretty critical for having clean water out there. Tourism in Florida, it's the largest sector in the state's economy. We have about 60 million visitors a year, and in 2011, the top destination in the state for tourists were parks and the state's forest, and that's after Disney World. So the most visited thing in the state of Florida, and I was pretty proud of that when I heard it because you always think, oh, Disney World and beach resorts, but looking at how people really want to get outside. In 2007, nature-based activities were enjoyed by 65% of Florida's tourists, and on average, in terms of the impact of tourists spent $79 a day for fishing, $25 for camping, $40 for wildlife viewing, and hunting and fishing and wildlife tourism in Florida supported 120,000 jobs. And we really have a great infrastructure. We have 160 state parks and 25 forests, and these supported 12 million visitors in the same time period. And it's important, it's not just the $4 or $8 or $20 they pay on the way in, but for every 1,000 people that attend a state park, there's 43,000 of direct benefits into the community. Closer to home, in Lee County, 4.8 million visitors and 22.8 million in tax revenue. So this is a really it's a vibrant part of our economy, an important part of our economy, and when, I get frustrated when I'm out and people are like, oh, that's the environment, that's that extra thing, or that's regulation, that's that piece that's in the way of us being successful. And it's really not. It's really the underpinning of moving forward. I thought I'd touch briefly on the hedonic value. And so when we're looking at conserving land, it's not just for the species or for the specific tourism activities, but what economic benefits from conserved land can people expect? When all the previous points come together about conserved land, what we see is an overall increase in land values. Studies consistently demonstrate that parks and open space have a positive impact on nearby residential property value. The National Association of Home Builders, yes, that's the National Association of Home Builders, found that parks and recreation areas can increase nearby building sites by 15 to 20%. There's been specific studies in Columbus, Ohio, that showed that land near parks increased between 7 and 23%, and that properties facing open space, like in Manhattan, the Central Park, that these are very expensive pieces of real estate in huge demand. And again, this phenomenon is called the hedonic value. It also applies to other amenities such as schools or libraries, police stations, transit stops. The two main factors that affect value are the proximity to the open space and also the density of the community that's nearby. I thought I'd do an extreme example. I found a home that's for sale. If anyone wants a nice cabin out west, Wilson, Wyoming, cabin with access to Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Park, cost $10 million. And the average house in Wilson, which is the community where it is $3 million. 25 miles away in Driggs, Idaho, which is a community right nearby, the average value of a home is $300,000. And so, while this is an extreme example of hedonic value, it's nonetheless pertinent. We've looked at using parks and conserved land for tourism and recreation and residential development, food and fiber, but there's also health benefits. Evidence increasingly suggests that obesity and inactivity are major public health problems, one with really expensive consequences. In a recent study done by the CDC, Center for Disease Control, they found $147 billion in healthcare costs could be attributed to obesity. Research suggests that nearby parks and open space help people increase their physical activity and reduce medical issues, and therefore reduce their medical expenses. Activities such as kayaking, jogging, hiking are all possible in open space. In Virginia Beach, I thought I'd do one specific example. They saved over $37 million in healthcare costs as a result of their park system. And they eliminated for low heart rate activities such as picnicking and strolling and bird watching, although I've seen some bird watchers and their heart rates get going pretty fast when they see some. And then they dropped respondents who don't engage in strenuous activities less than 4 times per week, and they found they had 94,000 residents that actually took advantage of their parks in a very engaged manner, and they equated that savings to over $38 million in health care. I guess what my takeaway message is that the next time someone tries to dismiss the environment or dismiss management or dismiss land acquisition as something that's ready to come when the next economic cycle comes around, remember that Florida spends $8 billion a year on roads. And we know from earlier by the response, no one comes to Florida for the roads. And so to think about spending taxpayers' resources on land acquisition and management, it's not morally appropriate, it's just good business. Thank you.